Hello, this is Abebe from University of Kondo Faculty of Informatics, and then this is our 7th Fundamentals of Programming tutorial. And then in our previous tutorial we have seen about the 3 different loop statements that will help us to execute the same statement many times. So if you are asked to execute the same piece of code maybe many times, instead of writing that code again and again, we can handle with the help of the loop statement. So basically in C++ there are 3 types of loop statement: the for loop, while loop, and the while loop. So usually they are designed for different programming situations. So we use for loop if we know in advance how many times the loop should be executed. If before we write the program, if we know how many times that statement or a group of statements are executed, in that case for loop is recommended. Whereas if we do not know in advance how many times the loop should be executed, we can use while loop or do while loop. So basically we can write every for loop program with the help of while loop and do while, because while and do while are also used if we know in advance how many times the loop should be executed, but the for loop is recommended in that scenario. But if we do not know in advance how many times the loop should be executed, you have to use either while loop or do while loop. Again, while and do while are almost similar, but with a small programming difference. We use while loop in our previous tutorial. We have seen the difference between while and do while. In this case, have a look. In the case of while loop, the control will check first and then the statement will be executed second, meaning the execution of the statement is highly depending on the control. If the control result false at the beginning of the program, this statement will have a guarantee to be executed 0 times. Whereas in the case of do while loop, the statement will have the first priority to be executed, because the statement will be executed first before the control, meaning this statement will have a guarantee to be executed one or more times, because this statement will have a chance to be executed before the condition is evaluated. So if you want at least one statement to be executed once before even the condition, you can use the do while statement. So you need to understand about this difference between while loop and do while loop. And then the other important point that you should understand is in the case of the for loop, if you run such kind of program, so this program will display the number 1 up to 5 on the screen, meaning in this program, if this condition results true, the number of statements that will be executed is only one statement. So if you have only one statement that depending on the for loop, in that case no need of adding a bracket. But basically the syntax is usually it's recommended to add a bracket for the for loop like this. Okay, you'll get the same result. So next to the for loop, you have to put everything inside the bracket, but usually bracket is optional if you have only one statement that will depending on the for loop. But for example, for each loop I need to display the value of I as well as the word welcome. In that case, I will look, I do have two statements that depending on this for loop. Let's run without adding a bracket and then let's see what's going on. Do you see? You will get 1 up to 5 and then finally you will get 1 welcome, because if you don't add a bracket, the for loop will execute only the first statement. When this for loop result is false, it will go to the second statement. So if you have more than one statement that depending on the for loop, if you have more than one statement inside the for loop, you have to make sure that you put it in a bracket. In this case, bracket is mandatory if you have more than one statement in between the for loop. let's have a look at the output there. Now we'll get 1 welcome, 2 welcome, 3 welcome, and 4, 5 welcome on the screen. So this is one important point that you should keep in mind. Okay, the other thing is, let's see, what if you make it like this? What if you do some wrong coding on the logic? For example, let's start with I equals to 6. If you run this program, what do you think is the expected output? The initial value is I equals to 6. 6 less than 5 is 0. So such kind of loop, we call it the no loop. You do create a loop which is not executed even once. This is what we call it the no loop. See, if you run this program, you will never get any output on the screen. No output at all, because the initial value is greater than the control. So at the first execution, this control results false. So there is no way that the compiler will go to this statement and then display output to you. So such kind of loop, we call it no loop. So whenever you deal with a loop, you have to avoid the no loop. The other one is, let's start with 1 while I less than. What if I make it like this, while I greater than 0? What do you think is the expected output from this program? So the value of I is 1. 1 greater than 0, true. Display 1, welcome. It will go to step 3. Increment the value of I by 1. It will become 2. 2 greater than 0, true. Display 2 and welcome. See, as you know, this is the step 0. This is the step 1, and then these two are the step 2, and then this is the step 3. Step 0 will be executed only once. So I equals 1, true. 1 greater than 0, true. Go to step 2. Display I, display welcome. 1, welcome. Go to step 3. Increment the value of I by 1. It was 1 plus 1, 2. Go to step 1. No need of going to step 0. So I will be 2. 2 greater than 0, true. 2, welcome. Go to step 3. 3. 3 greater than 0, true. 3, welcome. And then go to step 3. I will be 4. 4, welcome. And then, so what do you think is the expected output? You will get lots of outputs. There is no end of this program, because every time the value of I will start from 1, increment by 1, and then always the value of I is greater than 0. So such kind of loop, we call it unterminated loop. This loop will never terminate, because every value of I is usually greater than or equals to 0. So if you run this program, you will get lots of output on the screen. Do you see? It will continue, and then it will stack. Somewhere it will stack, because have a look. There are lots of edges. When I just click on press, it just stops. Now it's on the step of 1746, welcome. So this is what we call it unterminated loop. See, when I just click, it will stop, and then it will continue like this. So when you deal with a for loop, you have to make sure that the control has a termination point. This control has no termination point, so it's not controlling the program. So usually the control should have a controlling point. So this is what we call it unterminated loop. So whenever you deal with the for loop, you have to make sure that you don't add the no loop. Okay. Just don't add the no loop point. And then the other important point is you have to take care of the unterminated loop. Every loop should have a termination point. And then in the case of the for loop, if you have more than one statement, in the for loop, make sure that bracket is mandatory. So adding a bracket is mandatory if the number of statement is more than one. So these are the very important points that you should keep in mind when you deal with a loop statement. Thank you very much. Bye.